The blister rises on your palm before you even feel the burn. That is how fast the copper handle turns from merely hot to unbearable, and you have exactly the time it takes to notice the smell of your own skin before you have to decide whether to drop the pot or carry it. You carry it. You have carried worse. 9 feet of scalding turtle broth balanced on a copper stock pot the size of a washtub, across a brick floor slick with fat, past a fire that has not gone out in 11 hours, and if you spill even a ladle of it, it will not be the broth that punishes you. It will be Mr. Sharp, standing by the door with his hands folded behind his back, like he is already composing the sentence he plans to say about it. You do not spill it. You set it down on the trestle table hard enough to slosh but not hard enough to lose anything, and you stand there for one breath with your ruined palm pressed flat against your apron, feeling the wet heat bloom through the linen, and nobody asks if you are hurt. Nobody has time to ask. It is the 8th of April, 1770, and today the governor of Virginia is giving a dinner for 30 gentlemen in the octagonal supper room of the palace, and the kitchen you are standing in, low-ceilinged, brick-walled, detached from the great house by 40 feet of covered walkway, so that its smoke and its noise and its people never have to touch the polished floors above, has been awake since 3 in the morning, turning a live sea turtle, 4 calves' heads, 2 dozen pigeons, and a hog into food that men who have never once boiled water in their lives are going to eat with silver forks and call simple country fare. Nobody upstairs will know your name. That is the arrangement. That has always been the arrangement. You're 13 years old. You belong to His Excellency Lord Bottetour the same way the silver belongs to him, and the horses belong to him, and your entire purpose on this earth today is to make sure that when the second remove goes up those stairs, nothing on it looks like what it actually is. Because what it actually is disgusting. You have known this since your first week in this kitchen, when old Rachel handed you a calf's head, the whole head, eyes and all, the fur still bristling on the ears, and told you to singe it over the coals until the hide came off in your hands like a wet glove. You had not eaten anything that morning. You were sick behind the woodpile before you'd finished, and Rachel laughed at you, not unkindly, and told you that you'd get used to it, and she was right, you did, and that is the part that frightens you a little when you let yourself think about it. You got used to it. You can pull a calf's eye out of its socket now with 2 fingers and barely notice you're doing it. You can gut a live turtle without flinching. 11 months ago you would have called that a nightmare. Now you call it Tuesday. The turtle had come up from the wharves at Yorktown 2 days ago, packed in wet straw in a crate that took 2 men to carry, still alive, still moving its great flippers against the wood as if it understood, in whatever slow way a turtle understands anything, exactly where it was headed. It weighed close to 80 pounds. Rachel says the ones from the Indies can run twice that. But a green turtle of 80 pounds is more than enough to feed 30 men a soup so rich that half of them will need to loosen their waistcoats before the second course arrives, and none of them will ask what it took to get there. You know what it took. You were the one holding the rope. Killing a turtle is not like killing anything else you have done, and Rachel made you watch 3 times before she let you touch the knife yourself. You flip it onto its back first. Takes 2 of you. It thrashes, its claws raking the air, and there is a sound it makes that you still hear sometimes at night. A low hiss pushed out through a mouth that was never built to make sounds at all. Once it is on its back, it is helpless. That is the cruelty and the mercy of it in the same instant. The flippers claw at nothing. The head snakes out further than you would think possible, looking for something to bite. And this is the moment Rachel warned you about first, because a snapping turtle can take a finger off, even after its head is separated from its body. The jaw keeps working on its own for what feels like far too long, and a sea turtle's beak, though gentler in temperament, is still strong enough to break a bone if you are careless with your hands near it. You are not careless. You have learned not to be careless the way you have learned everything else in this kitchen, by paying for the mistake once, and only once. The knife goes in at the throat. Rachel guides your wrist the first time, her hand rough and dry over yours, and you feel the give of skin, then the resistance of muscle, then the strange soft nothing as the blade finds its way through to the other side. The blood comes out dark and startlingly plentiful, more than you expected from anything, and you have to catch it. That is the whole trick of turtle soup. The reason it costs what it costs and tastes like nothing else on any table in the colony. You catch the blood in a basin, and you do not waste a drop of it, because it goes back into the pot at the very end, off the heat, stirred in slow so it thickens the broth into something between a soup and a sauce. Dark red-brown, glossy, rich enough to coat a spoon. The shell has to be pried apart from the body while the animal is still technically twitching. Rachel calls this decent manners, waiting for the twitching to stop before you get properly to work. But the men who cook for Williamsburg's taverns don't always wait, she says, and you can taste the difference in a rushed turtle, same as you can taste the difference in a rushed bread. You work your knife around the plastron, the flat belly shell, feeling for the exact place where the cartilage gives instead of fights you, and when it finally separates with a wet crack that goes up through your knife into your wrist, the whole animal opens like a book nobody wanted to read. Inside, there is a logic to it that took you weeks to learn. The calipash is the greenish, gelatinous meat that clings to the upper shell, fatty, almost sweet, prized above everything else in the animal, the part a hostess brags about serving. The callipee is the pale, firmer meat from the lower shell, less rich but more plentiful, and a good cook layers both kinds into the soup so that every spoonful a gentleman lifts to his mouth has a little of each. The organs come out next, and most of them go into the scrap bucket for the hogs. But the liver Rachel keeps, minced fine, folded into the stuffing for forced meatballs that will float in the soup, disguised as something else entirely. Nothing about a turtle soup looks, by the time it reaches the table, like it ever belonged to a turtle. That is rather the point. The gentlemen upstairs want to eat the idea of luxury. They do not want to see the claws. Your hands, by the time you finish, are red to the wrist and starting to prune from the wet, and there is a smell on them that soap will not fully take away until tomorrow. Brackish, mineral, faintly sweet, the smell of the ocean and of something that used to be alive mixed together into something you cannot properly name. You wipe them on your apron out of habit more than hope, and reach for the next thing Rachel is already holding out to you, because there is no pause in this kitchen. There's never once been a pause, and the fire under the great cauldron needs feeding again before the broth can even begin its 4 hours of slow simmering into something a governor would recognize as soup. Your name is Adam. You were born on a quarter farm 40 miles west of here, on land that belonged to a man who sold you away from your mother when you were 8, because a debt needed settling and you were worth exactly as much, on paper, as 2 hogsheads of tobacco. You do not remember the sale itself with any clarity. You have decided somewhere along the way that this is a mercy, that some doors in your memory are better left unopened. But you remember the wagon ride into Williamsburg, the way the town seemed to go on forever after the quiet of the farm. Brick buildings taller than anything you had known, and the palace itself rising up at the end of the Duke of Gloucester Street, like something built by people who had never once worried about where their next meal was coming from. You have been in this kitchen 5 years now. You started as the boy who fetched water and fed the fire, the lowest task there is, and you have worked your way up through plucking and scaling and gutting to something Rachel now trusts, with a knife near the good cuts, which in this house is as close to an achievement as a person in your position is permitted to have. The kitchen itself is a building of its own, set apart from the palace by a covered brick colonnade so that the smoke and the noise and the smell of 30 pounds of boiling turtle blood never once drift into the rooms where the family and their guests actually live. This is deliberate. Everything about where you work has been built to keep the labour invisible, while keeping the labour close enough to be summoned in an instant. The kitchen has one enormous fireplace, wide enough that 2 grown men could lie down inside it head to foot, with an iron crane that swings pots in and out of the heat, and a row of spits along the back wall turned, when there is roasting to be done, by a boy even younger than you were when you started, cranking a wheel for hours until his shoulder locks and someone has to take over. The floor is brick, always slightly wet, always faintly sticky with rendered fat no amount of scrubbing ever fully lifts. The ceiling is low enough that Mr. Sharp, who is a tall man, ducks without thinking every time he passes beneath the drying racks, where hams and strings of sausage hang from the rafters like a second meteor ceiling. It is hot in this room in a way that has no season. In August it is a furnace that makes grown men strip to their shirts and still sweat through them in an hour. In January, with the door open to let smoke out, it is a furnace on one side and a cold wind on the other, and you learn to stand at whichever angle gives you the least of both. There is no month of the year when this room is comfortable. There is no month of the year when the fire is permitted to go fully out, because a cold hearth means a cold breakfast, and a cold breakfast in the governor's house is not a thing that happens ever for any reason. Rachel has run this kitchen for 19 years, longer than any governor has lasted in the palace, longer than most of the furniture has stood in the rooms above. She's somewhere past 50, though she herself is not entirely certain of the number, and her hands are a map of the work, a puckered white scar across 3 knuckles where a knife slipped in 1750-something, the tip of her left ring finger missing entirely, taken by a meat cleaver before you were even born, and burns old enough that the skin has gone shiny and tight in patches up both forearms. She moves through this kitchen the way you imagine a captain moves through a ship in a storm, not fast exactly, but never once uncertain, every motion aimed at exactly the task in front of her with nothing wasted. Taste it, she tells you now, holding out a wooden spoon with a thumbnail of broth cooling on it. And you taste, and you understand without being told what she is testing for. Not whether it is good, because it is always going to be good. Rachel does not produce food that is merely good, but whether it needs more sherry, more mace, more of the pale butter and flour thickening she calls a roux, worked into a pan until it smells of biscuits just short of burning. More sherry, you say, and she nods, because you were right. And being right about small things is the only kind of praise this kitchen offers, and you have learned to want it badly. 4 calves' heads wait on the far end of the trestle table, delivered whole from the butcher this morning with their hides still on, their eyes still in their sockets, staring at nothing with the particular blankness of something that stopped being an animal only a few hours ago. This is your task now, while the turtle simmers, and you have done it enough times that your hands know the rhythm even when your mind wanders. First, you singe. You hold each head close over the coals, not in the flame itself, just above it, close enough that the heat curls the short hairs black and sends up a smell that never once in 5 years has stopped turning your stomach a little. Something between burning hair and burning skin, because that is precisely what it is. The hide blisters and lifts. You scrape it with the back of a knife, working in short strokes from the crown down toward the muzzle, and the hair comes away in wet grey clumps that you flick into the scrap bucket, without looking too closely at what else might be in there. Underneath, the skin is pale and strange, poreless, nothing like anything you would want to touch, and you have to do this 4 times this morning, and your hands will smell of it until at least tomorrow, no matter how hard you scrub them with the harsh yellow soap kept by the washing trough. The eyes come out next. Rachel taught you to do this with your thumb and 2 fingers, working around the socket until the whole eye comes free, with a small wet sound and a faint give, like popping a grape from its skin, and you drop it into a separate bowl because the eyes too have their use, minced with the tongue and the brain into a forcemeat that will be pressed into small clay pots, baked, and served cold as a delicacy called hunter's head. A dish so far removed from its origins by the time it reaches the table that a gentleman could eat 3 spoonfuls of it and never once suspect he was eating what he was eating. You used to be sick doing this. Now you're simply tired. And being tired is, you have decided, a kind of progress, because it means your body has stopped fighting the work and started merely enduring it. And enduring it is what is required of you. The tongue, Rachel says, not looking up from the pot she's stirring, and you know what she means without further instruction. The tongue comes out through the underside of the jaw, worked free with a boning knife along the muscle that anchors it, and it is heavier in your hand than you expect every single time. A slick grey-pink thing that will be boiled, skinned, sliced thin, and served under a sauce so heavily spiced with nutmeg and lemon that no one upstairs will taste the tongue itself at all, only the sauce built to disguise it. They eat tongue and don't ask what it is, you said once in your first year, half a question. And Rachel had laughed the short laugh she gives when she thinks something is both true and sad at the same time. They eat everything and don't ask what it is, she said. That's the whole trick of a fine table, boy. The richer the man, the less he wants to know where his supper came from. You learn that now. It'll save you a great deal of confusion later. You have learned it. You have learned that a made dish, the fancy French-named creations that take up half the second course, the fricassees and the ragouts and the forcemeats pressed into fanciful moulds shaped like fish or flowers or castles, exist mostly to take something humble, something an ordinary farmer would eat plainly and gladly, and hide it under enough butter and wine and spice that a gentleman can eat it, without ever once being reminded that a calf died screaming to provide it, or that the same cuts, unadorned, feed the kitchen staff every night of the week without a scrap of sherry anywhere near them. The brains you save whole, floated briefly in vinegar water to firm them, then dredged in flour and fried in butter until the outside crisps and the inside stays soft as custard. This is Lord Boat-Tour's own favourite, or so the household believes, based on nothing more than the fact that his plate always comes back scraped clean of it, and so 4 calves means 4 sets of brains, 16 small golden pieces no bigger than your palm, arranged on a silver dish, with a garnish of fried parsley that took Rachel's youngest scullery girl the better part of an hour to fry without burning. You are not alone in this kitchen, though on a morning like this one it can feel that way. Everyone so consumed by their own narrow task that conversation dies out entirely for whole stretches of an hour. There is Patience, the scullery girl, 11 years old and already faster with a paring knife than most grown men, whose job today is oysters, 400 of them, shucked one at a time with a blade jammed into the hinge and twisted until the shell gives, her fingers wrapped in strips of old linen because otherwise the sharp edges would have sliced her to ribbons weeks ago. She shucks without looking, her eyes somewhere far away, the way you've learned to let your own mind wander during the parts of the work that no longer require your attention, and beside her the oysters pile up in a growing silver-grey heap, destined to be pickled in vinegar and mace for a dish that will sit untouched on the sideboard for most of the evening, because oysters, however fashionable, are the sort of thing gentlemen admire more than they eat. There is Prince, who is not a cook at all but the household senior manservant, and who comes through the kitchen door every 20 minutes or so to check the progress of each dish against a schedule kept entirely in his head, because a dinner service for 30 gentlemen is not merely a matter of cooking food, but of cooking food in the correct order, at the correct temperature, so that it arrives at table exactly when it is wanted and not a moment before or after. Prince is perhaps 40, immaculate in a way that seems almost impossible given where he works, his coat somehow free of grease, even after passing twice through a kitchen thick enough with rendered fat that the air itself feels slightly oily against your skin. He does not raise his voice. He has never once, in your 5 years here, raised his voice. He simply appears at your elbow at the precise moment you are falling behind, says a single word, turtle, or brains, or once memorably just your name, and you understand exactly what he means, and exactly how much trouble you are in, if it is not fixed within the next quarter hour. And there is Mr. Sharp, the steward, who oversees the whole below-stairs operation, and answers directly to the governor's private secretary, a hired white man who has never once, in your memory, thanked anyone in this kitchen for anything, though he is quick enough to point out when the sauce is too thin or the jelly is not set. He stands by the door now with his pocket watch open in his palm, and you know without looking that he is doing the same calculation Prince is doing, timing the whole enormous machine of the day against a clock that does not care how tired anyone's arms are. The jellies, Mr. Sharp says, to no one in particular, which in this kitchen means it is directed at Rachel, because everything is ultimately directed at Rachel. Setting, Rachel says without turning, give them the cold larder till 2, they'll hold. The jellies are calves' feet, 6 pairs of them, boiled for the better part of 6 hours until the bones fall apart and the water around them turns thick and glue-like with rendered gelatin, then strained through a cloth and clarified with egg whites until it runs as clear as glass, sweetened with sugar and wine and set in tin moulds shaped like little castles and crowns. This liquid will chill in the cold larder, a small brick room dug half into the earth behind the kitchen, lined with ice hauled up from the ice house in blocks cut last winter from the palace pond, and by the time it turns out onto the silver dish tonight, trembling faintly, catching candlelight in its clear amber depths, not one of the 30 gentlemen eating it will think for even a moment about the 6 pairs of boiled hooves that made it possible. They will think it delicate. They will think it clever. It is, in its way, both of those things, and it is also, underneath the cleverness, exactly what it started as. The parts of an animal that a hungrier household would have thrown to the dogs transformed by hours of unglamorous labour into something fit for a lord's table. There is a syllabub too, whipped from cream and sherry and lemon into a froth that will not fully hold its shape for more than an hour, which means it cannot be made until the last possible moment, which means someone, you, most likely, since Patience's hands are committed to the oysters until midday, will spend the better part of half an hour with a bundle of birch twigs bound together as a whisk, beating cream in a wide bowl until your shoulder burns and the cream finally lifts into soft peaks that hold, briefly, the shape of whatever spoon lifts them. "Everything in this kitchen," Rachel says once, watching you whisk, sweat running freely down the side of your face, though the morning is not yet warm, is either something that used to be part of an animal nobody wants to think about, or something that took an hour of a person's arm to make look effortless. There is no third kind of dish. Remember that, and you'll understand every meal you ever cook for the rest of your life. You do not fully understand it yet. Not at 13, but you will. You're starting to. It happens a little after 11, the way disasters in this kitchen always seem to happen. Not during a quiet stretch, when there might be room to recover, but during the worst possible crush of activity, when 6 things need doing at once, and there is no spare hand anywhere in the room. The spit boy, a child of 9 named Toby, who's been cranking the roasting wheel since before dawn, lets his grip slip for half a second, distracted by the shout of a cart arriving at the kitchen door and the joint of mutton on the spit swings hard against the fire irons and knocks a burning log loose from the grate. It rolls, still flaming, straight toward the basket of kindling stacked against the wall for tomorrow's fire, and for one long moment nobody moves because nobody has quite processed what is happening fast enough to act on it. You move first. You do not decide to. Your body simply does it. The way your hands know the rhythm of a task before your mind has caught up to giving the order. You grab the water bucket kept by the door for exactly this purpose. Every kitchen in Virginia keeps one, because kitchen fires that escape their hearths have burned down half the wooden buildings this colony has ever built, and even a brick kitchen like this one has a wooden roof, wooden shelves, wooden everything above the fireplace itself. And you throw it. Not perfectly, some of it slopping over your own feet and soaking straight through your shoes, but enough of it lands true, and the log hisses and goes black, and the danger passes in less time than it takes to describe. Rachel is beside you within seconds, kicking the log fully clear of the kindling basket with the side of her boot, her face gone hard in a way you've only seen a handful of times before. She does not shout at Toby. She does not need to. The boy is already crying, silent, terrified tears, understanding better than anyone in the room what almost just happened, because a fire in this kitchen does not stay in this kitchen. It jumps the covered walkway. It reaches the palace itself, 40 feet away, where the family sleeps and where 30 gentlemen are meant to sit down to dinner in 6 hours. And a burned governor's palace is not a mistake anyone in this kitchen would survive with their position, or perhaps their skin, intact. "Water bucket," Rachel says instead, very quietly to the whole room. Gets checked full, every single morning before the fire is even laid. Every one of you. I don't care whose task it was yesterday. Your feet are soaked through, and your heart is still hammering against your ribs, hard enough that you can feel it in your throat, and you stand there for a moment in the sudden after quiet, the whole kitchen briefly stilled around the smell of wet ash, and you understand something you have half understood for a long time without ever quite putting words to it. that everything in this room, every dish, every fire, every knife, exists inside a margin so thin that the whole elaborate machine of the day could collapse into disaster in the space of a single unwatched breath. Upstairs, a housemaid straightens a candlestick by 1/2 inch, and no one's life changes. Down here, a boy's grip slips on a spit handle, and a building might burn. Toby is set to scrubbing pots for the rest of the morning, a small mercy that lets him stay near the fire without being trusted near it directly. And the spit is handed to a girl called Nell, who has done the job before and does not need reminding of what almost happened, because she watched the whole thing from 3 feet away with the joint of pigeon in her hands, frozen, and has not fully stopped shaking either. You go back to your own work. The syllabub still needs its final whisking. The calves' brains are not yet dredged, and your hands, when you pick the birch whisk back up, are trembling faintly in a way that has nothing to do with the effort of the whipping itself. Rachel notices. Rachel notices everything. "First close call?" she asks, not unkindly, passing behind you toward the fire. "No," you say, and it is true, though you do not elaborate, and she does not ask you to. There have been others. There is always something in this kitchen close enough to disaster that you learn eventually to keep working with your hands shaking rather than let the shaking stop you, because the dinner does not care what almost happened an hour ago. The dinner is still coming at 4 o'clock whether the kitchen nearly burned down or not. By 4 o'clock, the kitchen has transformed itself into something closer to controlled chaos than the grinding, methodical labour of the morning. Every surface is covered. The turtle soup sits in its great tureen, dark and glossy, ladled just before serving so the top does not skin over. The calves' heads, in their various disguised forms, are arranged across a dozen silver dishes, the tongue in its lemon sauce, the brains fried golden, the hunter's head forcemeat turned out of its pots and sliced into neat rounds that give away nothing of what they contain. The jellies have come up from the cold larder trembling and clear. The syllabub, whisked at the very last possible moment, sits in tall glasses layered with wine at the bottom and pale foam at the top, already beginning, almost imperceptibly, to weep and separate, which is why it must go up the instant it is finished and not 1 minute later. Prince appears in the doorway, and this time there is the faintest note of urgency in his usual composure. "First remove," he says, and the room moves. You do not go upstairs. You have never once in 5 years gone upstairs during a dinner service, and you never will. Your entire relationship to the meal you have spent all day building ends here, at the bottom of the covered walkway, where you and Nell and Patience load the great silver dishes onto trays that Prince and 2 other footmen carry the final 40 feet into a world you're not permitted to enter. But you know, from the small scraps that filter back, a word from Prince between courses, the pattern of what returns to be scraped and washed, what comes back with barely a bite taken, and what comes back licked clean, roughly what is happening up there, and you have pieced together over the years a picture of the room itself from those scraps, the way you might piece together the shape of a whole animal from a scattering of its bones. The octagonal supper room, 8 sides, 8 tall windows, candlelight thrown back and multiplied by mirrors and by the polished surface of the long table until the whole room seems to glow from within. 30 gentlemen, Burgesses mostly, come into town because the House of Burgesses is sitting this spring, along with the governor's own household, and whichever visiting dignitaries happen to be passing through Williamsburg this particular week. Lord Botetor himself at the head of the table. You have seen him only twice in your life, both times at a distance, once crossing the palace green in his state coach, and once through a half-open door as he passed near the kitchen wing on some errand of his own, and both times you were struck by how ordinary he looked for a man whose name is spoken, below stairs, with a mixture of fear and something almost like fondness that you have not heard attached to any governor before him. He is unmarried. He keeps no wife, no children, in a palace built for a family, and the household gossip, the below-stairs kind, traded over the washing trough and around the fire late at night when the day's work is finally done, says he treats his servants, even the enslaved ones, with a gentleness that startles people used to something harder. He is said to have ordered a proper coach built at his own considerable expense, so his horses would not have to strain, to have taken a personal interest in the racecourse he built just outside town, to have shown more warmth toward the Burgesses, even the ones who argue loudest against the Crown's authority, than any royal governor before him managed to show. None of this makes him any less your owner. None of this changes what you are to him on paper, which is property, valued and inventoried the same as the silver he eats from tonight. But it is, you have come to understand the difference between a hard master and a merely ordinary one, and in your position that difference matters more than anyone who has never lived it could fully understand. Nell tells you, hours later, scraping plates at the washing trough by candlelight, that the turtle soup came back nearly empty from every single dish, which is the highest compliment a kitchen this size ever receives, because it means 30 men who could have eaten anything in the colony chose tonight to eat everything you made for them, down to the last spoonful. The washing up takes nearly as long as the cooking did. 400 oyster shells to be swept from the floor where patients worked. A tureen the size of a cradle to be scrubbed clean of dried turtle fat, which clings to copper the way stubbornness clings to a mule, and does not come off without real effort and real lye soap that leaves your knuckles cracked and stinging by the time you finish. The spit irons, black with grease, have to be scoured with sand and ash until they shine again for tomorrow. Every dish that touched the meal must be washed before anyone is permitted to sleep, because tomorrow's breakfast begins at 5 and there is no borrowing time from tonight to give to tomorrow morning. Your arms ache in a way that has become so familiar you barely register it as pain anymore, more a kind of constant low hum beneath everything else you feel, the particular ache of muscles that have whisked and stirred and hauled and scrubbed from before dawn until well past dark. Your feet, still damp inside your shoes from the water bucket you threw hours earlier, have gone numb somewhere in the last hour, and when you finally sit down on the bench by the banked fire, you feel the numbness give way all at once to a pins and needles burn that makes you wince. Rachel sits across from you, working a length of thread through a torn seam in her apron by the last of the firelight, and for a while neither of you says anything at all, because there is nothing left in either of you tonight for conversation. The kitchen, so violently alive 12 hours ago, has gone quiet in the particular way it goes quiet at the end of every one of these long days. Banked coals ticking faintly as they cool. The smell of turtle and tallow and wood smoke settled so deep into the walls and the beams that you've stopped noticing it is there at all, the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. You did well today, Rachel says finally, not looking up from her sewing. It is not a large compliment. It is not meant to be. But in this kitchen, on a day like today, it is enough. And you find that it settles something in your chest that the exhaustion had left unsettled. A small warm coal of its own that will still be glowing faintly tomorrow when the fire has to be built up again from nothing. and the whole enormous machine of feeding 30 gentlemen begins once more. You sleep in a loft above the kitchen, a low space under the rafters shared with Toby and 2 other boys, close enough to the chimney that the bricks hold a residual warmth long after the fire below has been banked for the night. It is not comfortable, not in any way that word is usually meant, but it is warm and it is dry, and after a day like today, warm and dry feel very close to luxury. You're asleep within minutes of lying down, too tired even to dream, and the church bells of Bruton Parish, 3 streets away, mark the hour without waking you at all. Sundays are different, or as different as they can be for someone whose labour does not fully stop simply because the calendar says it should. There is still a breakfast to be made, still a modest dinner for whichever household members remain in town, but the great formal dinners do not happen on the Sabbath, and by early afternoon, if the week's work has gone smoothly, Rachel sometimes lets you and Toby slip away for an hour or 2 before the evening chores begin. You use one such afternoon in early May to climb the bell tower of Bruton Parish Church, following a sexton's boy you have come to know, a free black youth named Isham who sweeps the church and tends its bells and has, more than once, let you up into the tower on the promise that you will not touch anything and will come straight back down the moment he says so. The climb is narrow and dim, a wooden ladder stair that groans under your weight, thick with the smell of old dust and pigeon droppings, and by the time you push open the small hatch at the top and step out onto the narrow walkway that circles the base of the spire, your legs are trembling from the climb and the wind hits you so suddenly, so much colder and stronger than anything at ground level, that you have to grip the railing with both hands, and then you see it. All of it. Williamsburg laid out below you like something you could hold in your 2 palms. The Duke of Gloucester Street runs straight as a ruled line from the capital at one end to the College of William and Mary at the other, nearly a mile of it, wide enough for 6 carriages abreast, lined with the brick and clapboard fronts of shops and taverns you've walked past 1,000 times without ever once seeing them from above. The capital itself at the eastern end sits low and solid, its own small cupola catching the afternoon light, and there, off to the side, small enough from this height that you could cover it entirely with your thumb, is the palace, your palace, the building that has swallowed nearly every hour of your waking life for 5 years, reduced from up here to a neat brick rectangle, with a green lawn and a canal running arrow straight toward a distant tree line, the whole grand machine of it looking, from this height, almost peaceful. They call this the finest street in all the colonies, Isham says, coming to stand beside you, his voice pitched to carry over the wind. Grander than anything in Boston, they say. Grander than most of England, even, though I've never seen England to judge for myself. You think of the kitchen, of the turtle blood on your hands 3 weeks ago, the singed hair smell of the calves' heads, the ache that never fully leaves your shoulders anymore. None of that is visible from up here. From up here, Williamsburg looks like exactly what the men who built it wanted it to look like. Orderly, prosperous, a small jewel of English civilization set down in the Virginia woods. The mess of it, the smoke, the offal, the sweat, the people like you who make the whole polished surface possible, is tucked away behind kitchen walls and covered walkways precisely so that a view like this one can exist uncontradicted. You ever think about what's underneath all this? You ask Isham, not entirely sure what you mean by the question yourself. He considers it for a moment, looking out over the same view. Every day, he says finally, doesn't change the view any, but I think about it. You stand there a while longer until the cold and the wind push you both back toward the hatch, and on the climb back down, your legs shaking now as much from the height as the effort. You find yourself thinking about Rachel's words from the night of the great dinner, that everything in that kitchen is either a part of an animal nobody wants to think about, or an hour of somebody's arm made to look effortless, and understanding in a way you'd not quite grasped before that the whole of Williamsburg operates on precisely the same principle, just built larger, just built out of streets and buildings instead of soup and jelly. There is one task that takes you outside the kitchen walls more regularly than almost any other, and it carries its own particular danger, small but real, that has nothing to do with fire or knives or scalding water. Twice a month, when the palace stores run low on the fine, imported spices no Virginia garden can grow, mace, nutmeg, cinnamon, the sherry and Madeira that arrive by ship from across an ocean you've never seen and likely never will, Mr. Sharp sends you down to the shops along Duke of Gloucester Street with a written note in his own hand, and you learn, on your very first such errand, exactly why that note matters more than anything else you carry. Never go without it, Rachel warned you, tucking the folded paper into your coat herself that first time, her voice sharper than you'd ever heard it. Never, not even to the end of the street and back, a boy your age, walking about town with no note from his master explaining his business, is a boy any patroller in this county has the right to stop and question, and worse. And there won't be one thing anyone in this kitchen can do to help you if that happens before you've had the sense to show what's folded in your own pocket. You have not forgotten the warning. You carry the note the way another child might carry a lucky stone, your hand finding the shape of it through your coat every few minutes on the walk into town. And though nothing has ever gone wrong on any of these errands across nearly 2 years of making them, the low hum of watchfulness never fully leaves you the whole length of Duke of Gloucester Street, past the Capitol at one end and the shop fronts crowded in between, past other enslaved people running the same kind of errand for other households, each of them, you notice, walking with the same particular purposeful quickness, the same practised avoidance of any gentleman's eye that might read purposelessness as suspicion. The apothecary shop where the spices are weighed and wrapped smells like nothing else in town, a dry dusty sharpness of 100 different barks and seeds, and dried leaves all layered together, cut through some days by the sweet heavy smell of the sugar loaves stacked in blue paper by the door, each one hard and dense as a stone, requiring the shopkeeper's iron nippers to break off pieces small enough to weigh. You watch him work the scale with quick practised hands, sliding small brass weights along a beam until it balances, and you count out the coins from the household's purse yourself. Though the counting itself is a formality, Mr. Sharp's note specifies exactly what is to be bought and precisely how much may be spent. And the shopkeeper, who has served this household for years, rarely so much as glances at the coins before wrapping the goods and sending you on your way. It is on one such errand, in your second spring, that you pass close enough to the market square to see, for the first time with real understanding rather than a child's vague unease, an auction taking place at its edge. A small knot of people standing on a raised platform while a crowd of gentlemen inspect them, the way you have watched those same gentlemen inspect horses, and you stop for one held breath, unable to look away, until the older enslaved man walking the same errand beside you that day puts a firm hand on your shoulder and steers you onward without a word. "Don't watch that," he says quietly, once you're a full block clear of it, his voice carrying none of the reproach you half expected. only a tired, weary kindness. Watching doesn't change one thing about it, and it'll sit in your chest the rest of the day if you let it. Best you can do is get your errand done and get back to whatever kitchen or field is lucky enough to still have your own 2 hands in it today. You think about his words the whole walk back, your parcel of spices heavy in your arms, the folded note still tucked safe in your coat, and you understand, with a clarity that settles cold and permanent somewhere beneath your ribs, that the note in your pocket, the household that feeds you, even Rachel's hard-won gentleness, none of it is protection in any true sense. It is only, at best, a fragile margin of safety, thinner than you like to admit on your better days, and entirely dependent on a whole chain of decisions made by people who owe you nothing and could, at any point, decide differently. You carry that understanding back into the kitchen with the spices, and you do not speak of what you saw to anyone, not even Rachel, though you suspect from the particular gentleness with which she takes the parcel from your hands that evening, asking no questions at all about why your face looks the way it does, that she has made this same walk, seen this same platform, carried this same silent weight home more times than either of you could ever count. The months that follow blur together into a rhythm you have come to know as well as your own pulse. Spring gives way to a Virginia summer thick and wet enough that the kitchen becomes something close to unbearable by midday. The great fire that never fully goes out, turning the whole low-ceilinged room into an oven on top of an oven, sweat running freely down your back and soaking through your shirt within an hour of waking, no matter how early you rise to beat the worst of the heat. You learn to work faster in the cool of early morning and slower, more carefully in the punishing hours after noon, when a moment's inattention near the fire can mean a burn that takes a week to heal properly in weather this humid. There are more dinners. Always more dinners. Lord Botetourt is, by every account that reaches you below stairs, a governor who genuinely enjoys the company of Virginians in a way his predecessors did not always manage, and he entertains often. Burgesses down from the western counties, who have never in their lives eaten off silver, visiting clergy, officers passing through, and in June, a grand dinner tied to the horse races he has built, and funded himself at a course just outside town, a passion of his that has made him, among the planters and gentlemen of the colony, something close to genuinely beloved. You do not attend the races. You hear about them the way you hear about everything upstairs, in fragments carried down by prince and by the footman. But you notice, over these months, a particular warmth in how the household staff speaks of their owner that you have not heard attached to any master you have known or heard described. It does not change your circumstances. It does not make you free, or paid, or anything other than what you have always been within this household. But it is, you have slowly come to understand, a form of luck, thin and conditional as it is, and you have seen enough of how things could be otherwise to know not to take it lightly. Your skill grows with the repetition. By midsummer you can bone a whole pigeon in under 2 minutes without tearing the skin, a task that took you a quarter hour and ruined half your birds when you first attempted it. You can tell by smell alone when a sauce has begun to catch on the bottom of the pan a full 10 seconds before the burnt smell would be obvious to anyone standing further from the fire. Rachel begins, in small ways, to let you work unsupervised on dishes she would never have trusted you with a year ago. An entire remove of stewed pigeons once, prepared start to finish under your own hand while she managed 3 other dishes at once, and when it came back from the table nearly empty, she said nothing at all, only nodded once in your direction across the busy kitchen, and you understood that this silence was its own kind of praise, larger than words, because it meant she'd stopped needing to watch you. There are hard days too, days the summer heat and the endless labour wear you down to something close to despair. A Tuesday in July when you burn your forearm badly enough on the edge of a roasting pan that Rachel has to pack the burn in cold butter and bind it, and you work the rest of that week one-handed, slower, more exhausted than you've ever been, gritting your teeth through pain that throbs in time with your own pulse every time you lift anything heavier than a spoon. There is a night in August when word comes down that a woman you knew slightly, enslaved to a neighbouring household, has been sold south, away from her children, and the whole kitchen goes quiet and grim for 2 full days afterward, everyone working with their heads down and their thoughts turned inward, because it is a fate that hangs over every single person in this room, regardless of how well they cook, how loyal they are, how gentle their particular owner happens to be this year. Gentleness, you have learned, can end. It ended for her. But mostly the summer passes in the steady, exhausting, oddly satisfying rhythm of the work itself. Fires built and banked, dishes made and washed, seasons of vegetables coming and going from the kitchen garden Rachel also oversees, the whole enormous machine of feeding a governor's household turning over day after day after day, and you inside it, growing taller, growing stronger, growing more skilled, without ever once forgetting exactly what you are within it. By September the heat begins, at last, to break, the evenings cooling enough that the kitchen becomes almost pleasant again after dark, and you allow yourself in these easier weeks something close to contentment. It will not last. You do not know that yet. But there is a particular quality to the early autumn of that year that you will remember for the rest of your life, as the last calm stretch before everything below stairs changed. The first sign is small enough that you almost miss it. In late September, a tray comes back down from the palace nearly untouched. A light supper, nothing elaborate, just some broth and a little boiled fowl. And Prince, setting it down on the trestle table, says only, "His Excellency wasn't hungry tonight," in a tone so carefully neutral that you know at once something had been smoothed over rather than reported plainly. It happens again 2 nights later, and again after that. By the first week of October, the household is speaking of it openly, in the careful, lowered voices people use when discussing something they are frightened of and do not yet have a name for. The governor has taken to his bed. The governor's appetite, so reliable for 2 full years that Rachel could plan an entire week's dinners around his known preferences, has failed him almost entirely, and what little he does eat, he cannot always keep down. Doctors come and go through the palace's main entrance at hours that have nothing to do with mealtimes, which is itself a kind of message, because doctors on a schedule mean a patient whose condition changes fast enough to require it. You catch glimpses of them sometimes, crossing the green from the kitchen window, men in dark coats carrying leather cases, moving with the particular brisk seriousness of people who know they are being watched and judged by everyone who sees them. Rachel's kitchen changes with the household's mood. The great elaborate dinners stop entirely. No more turtle soup, no more calves' heads dressed a dozen fanciful ways, no more syllabub whisked at the final possible moment for 30 gentlemen's pleasure. Instead there is broth, there is barley water, there is calf's foot jelly made not for its cleverness but for its gentleness on a failing stomach, and you find yourself boiling those same 6 pairs of hooves you've boiled 100 times before for pure luxury, doing the work now with a different kind of care entirely, as though the trembling amber jelly might actually matter to whether a man lives or dies, and perhaps, in its small modest way, it does. Sassafras tea, Rachel tells you one evening, handing you a bundle of dried bark and roots to steep, and beef tea, strong as you can make it without curdling, and nothing with pepper in it, nothing that'll fight his stomach. Her face, usually so unreadable, has gone tight and worried in a way you've rarely seen. You do not ask her why she cares so much what happens to the man who owns her, because you already half know the answer, and it is more complicated than simple loyalty. It is the plain, practical fear of what happens to a household and everyone within it when its master dies and the whole careful, fragile arrangement of a life gets thrown suddenly, violently into question. What happens to us, you ask anyway quietly, one night while stirring beef tea over a low flame, if he doesn't get better? Rachel's quiet for a long moment before she answers. Nobody knows, she says finally. That's the truth of it, boy. He's got no wife, no children here. Whatever happens to this house, to all of us in it, gets decided by men we've never met, sitting in rooms we'll never see, for reasons that won't have one thing to do with how well any of us cooked his dinner. That's always been true. It's just easier to forget it when the man himself is kind. You do not sleep well that night. Lying awake in the loft above the kitchen, listening to Toby's steady breathing and thinking about the word sold, the way you have not let yourself think about it in months, and outside, somewhere across the dark green lawn, in a bedchamber you've never seen and never will, Lord Beautessort lies fighting an illness that the doctors, for all their leather cases and grave faces, do not seem able to name. The 15th of October begins like any other day of the illness has begun for the past 2 weeks now. Early, grim, quiet. The kitchen fire built up in near silence because nobody has had the heart for the usual morning talk since the sickness settled over the household. You're straining barley water through a fine cloth, watching the pale liquid drip slow and steady into the pot below when you hear it. Footsteps. Too many of them, too fast, crossing the covered walkway from the palace toward the kitchen at an hour when almost nobody comes that way at all. It is Prince. But it is not Prince as you have ever seen him before. His composure, that immaculate, unshakable calm you've relied on as a fixed point in this kitchen for 5 years, has simply gone, stripped away entirely. And what stands in the doorway instead is a man with his coat only half buttoned and his face grey, in a way that tells you everything before he says a single word. He's gone, Prince says. His voice cracks on the second word just slightly, just enough that you understand he's fighting to keep it steady at all. His Excellency died a little past 9 this morning. The kitchen goes utterly still. Rachel's spoon stops moving in the pot she's been stirring. Patience, in the corner with a basket of turnips, simply sits down on the bench, hard, as though her legs have stopped agreeing to hold her up. You stand there with the straining cloth still in your hands, barley water dripping past you unnoticed, and you feel something strange happen in your own chest. Not quite grief, because you barely knew the man, saw him only twice in 5 years and never once spoke to him, but something adjacent to grief, a cold, hollow, dropping sensation that you recognize after a moment as fear. Rachel is the first to move. She sets down her spoon with great deliberate care, wipes her hands on her apron, and crosses the room to where Prince stands, and for a moment the two of them simply look at each other. Two people who have run this household's invisible machinery for nearly 2 decades between them, absorbing together the fact that the man both their lives have revolved around for the last 2 years is, as of this morning, simply no longer in the world. "What happens now?" Rachel says. It is not really a question. It is the same question you asked her days ago, and now there is no comfortable answer to soften it with. "I don't know," Prince says. "Nobody knows yet. The council will govern in the meantime. Mr. Nelson will likely take charge of things until London sends word of a new appointment. As for the household—" He stops. He does not finish the sentence, and the unfinished shape of it hangs in the kitchen air like smoke that has nowhere to go. The work does not stop, even now. This is the strangest, hardest thing you learn that day, that grief and fear, however large, do not excuse a household from needing to be fed, and within the hour Rachel has you all back at your stations, moving through the day's tasks with hands that shake slightly and eyes that keep drifting toward the door, toward the covered walkway, toward the palace where a body that was, 12 hours ago, a living man who liked his brains fried golden and his soup thick with sherry, now lies in a room being prepared by people you will never meet for whatever comes next. By early afternoon the household has been told to prepare for mourning. Black cloth ordered from the shops on Duke of Gloucester Street to drape the windows and doorways of the palace's public rooms, and in the kitchen an order comes down that startles even Rachel. Funeral baked meats to be prepared over the coming days for the mourners who will come to pay their respects before the burial, and the household's own meals for the foreseeable future are to be simple, sombre, without the smallest hint of festivity. You spend that afternoon boning hams for a morning table you will never see set, your hands moving through the familiar motions on their own, while your mind circles again and again around the same unanswerable question Rachel voiced that morning. What happens now? What happens to Rachel, who has given this kitchen 19 years and has nowhere else in the world that would take her skill and pay it what it is worth, even if she were free to seek work elsewhere? What happens to Toby, still too young to be worth much on his own to anyone? What happens to you, that evening, exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with physical labour and everything to do with the sheer weight of the day? You find Rachel sitting alone by the banked fire long after everyone else has gone up to sleep, staring into the coals with an expression you've never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly, and not quite grief, but something worn and old and resigned. The look of a woman who has survived enough uncertain transitions in her life to know that surviving this one will require the same thing all the others required: endurance and waiting and doing the next task in front of her, whether or not she knows what the one after it will be. "Sit," she says, without looking up, and you sit beside her on the bench, close enough that your shoulder nearly touches hers, and for a long while neither of you says anything at all, the two of you simply watching the coals shift and settle in the dark, listening to the palace bell somewhere across the lawn toll the hour in a rhythm that tonight sounds nothing at all like the ordinary passage of time, and everything like a warning. The funeral comes several days later, and by then the whole of Williamsburg has draped itself in black. Shop fronts along Duke of Gloucester Street hang dark cloth in their windows. The bells of Bruton Parish toll, slow and heavy, at intervals throughout the day, a sound that carries clear across town and into the kitchen where you work, so that every task that week gets done to the accompaniment of that distant, mournful ringing. You are permitted, along with most of the household staff, to stand at the edge of the crowd that gathers along the route as the procession makes its way from the palace to the chapel at the College of William and Mary, where His Excellency is to be laid to rest beneath the floor of the building itself. This is not an invitation extended out of kindness, so much as a practical necessity. The household must be represented, must be seen to grieve, and besides, the kitchen's work for that particular morning has been finished ahead of time precisely so that all of you could be spared for the hour. You've never seen so many people gathered silently in one place. Burgesses in their formal black, still in town for the session that his death has now thrown into a different kind of solemnity entirely. Merchants and tradesmen from every shop along the street. Enslaved people from a dozen households, standing at the edges the way you stand, watching a procession move past that will decide, in ways none of you can yet predict, what the coming months and years hold for every single person here. The coffin itself moves slowly, drawn by horses draped in black, followed by what seems like the whole of official Virginia walking behind it in solemn ranks. Members of the council, burgesses, the college's own faculty in their academic robes, and behind them, a crowd that stretches back further than you can see from where you stand. The muffled drums beat a slow, steady rhythm that you feel as much in your chest as you hear with your ears. And somewhere in that crowd of black coats and bowed heads are men whose names will, though none of you standing here today could possibly know it, be spoken for centuries to come. Burgesses from the western counties who have argued fiercely against the crown's taxes, even while dining at this same governor's table. Men who will, within a handful of years, put their names to documents that reshape the world, though today they are simply mourners, walking slowly behind a coffin, grieving a man who treated them, by most accounts, with more genuine respect than they expected from anyone London ever sent to govern them. You do not know any of their names. From where you stand at the crowd's edge, they are simply more black coats, more bowed heads, indistinguishable from the merchants and clergymen around them. It will be years, if it happens at all, before you learn which faces in that crowd belong to men history would remember. And on this particular grey October morning, none of that matters half so much as the plain, immediate fact in front of you. The bells tolling, the coffin passing, and the cold, hollow uncertainty settling deeper into your chest with every slow step of the procession. The burial itself happens inside the chapel, out of sight of the crowd gathered on the green, and you stand there in the cold October air with Rachel on one side of you and Toby on the other, none of you speaking until the ceremony concludes and the crowd begins slowly to disperse back into the ordinary business of a town that must, whatever has happened, keep functioning. Walking back to the palace kitchen afterward, the streets around you full of the low murmur of a town processing its grief, Rachel finally speaks, quietly, more to herself than to you. "Well," she says, "that's done then, and there is nothing else to say because the doing is finished, and the waiting, the real waiting, the waiting to learn what becomes of a kitchen and a household with no master left to serve, has only just begun." The weeks that follow are unlike any you have known in this kitchen. There is no governor to cook for, no 30 gentlemen expecting turtle soup and calves, brains fried golden, and the strange hollow quiet of a great house without its master settles over the palace like dust over furniture left under sheets. The council governs the colony now in the interim with Mr. Nelson, its president, seeing to the business of Virginia from his own house rather than moving into the palace itself, and for a time nobody seems entirely certain what is to become of the building, its grounds, its stores of silver and linen and wine, or of the household that has kept it running for 2 years. It is Prince, in the end, who brings the news that settles the worst of your fear, delivered one evening in the kitchen with something almost like relief in his voice for the first time since the day Lord Bottetour died. The palace household, the kitchen staff, the grounds men, the stable hands, all of you, belongs, as it turns out, not to the late governor personally, but to the office itself, maintained by the colony for whichever royal governor occupies the palace next. Lord Bottetour had no wife, no children in Virginia to inherit or dispose of anything. The great house, its furnishings, and the people who keep it running all remain exactly where they are, waiting, the same as everything else in this strange interim for London to send a name. It is not freedom. It is not even, really, safety, not in any permanent sense. A new governor could still prove harsh, could still reshape the household to his own liking, could still, in theory, decide the kitchen needs fewer hands than it currently has. But it is for now continuity, and after weeks of not knowing whether you would still be sleeping in this loft come winter, continuity feels like something close to a gift. We keep doing what we've always done, Rachel tells the kitchen, the morning the news is confirmed, and there is something in her voice that sounds, for the first time in a month, almost like her old self returning. Whoever comes next will need feeding, same as the last one did. That much never changes. Winter comes on hard that year, the kitchen fire burning through cords of wood faster than any season you can remember. Your hands cracking and splitting at the knuckles from the constant work in cold water, despite the fire's heat. And still no new governor has arrived by the time the ice begins forming thick enough on the Palace Canal that Toby and the other boys are permitted, on the rare free afternoon, to slide across it in their boots the way you once watched other children do on a frozen river a lifetime ago. In the last Colonial episode you can remember Rachel describing from her own girlhood. Word eventually comes, well into the following year, that a new governor has been named and will cross the ocean to take up residence. A different man entirely, with different habits, different tastes, a different temper that the whole household will have to learn from scratch, the way you once learned Lord Bottetour's fondness for fried calves' brains. You do not know yet, standing in the kitchen on the cold morning the news arrives, whether this new man will be kind or hard, generous or exacting, whether the fragile, unusual gentleness of the last 2 years was simply luck that has now run its course. Nobody below stairs knows. That uncertainty, Rachel has taught you by now, is simply the permanent weather of a life like yours, and the only genuine choice available to you within it is whether to meet each new season of not knowing, with your hands still working or your hands stopped cold with fear. You have learned, slowly, painfully, which choice keeps you alive. The new governor arrives in the autumn of the following year, and with him comes an entirely new education in what a kitchen is permitted to guess about a man from the shape of his appetite. Where Lord Bottetour favoured delicate things, brains fried golden, jellies trembling and clear, a soup rich enough to need only a spoon of it to satisfy. The new man's table runs heavier, hungrier, closer to the food of the countryside he claims to love, and Rachel adjusts the whole rhythm of the kitchen within a matter of weeks, the way she has clearly adjusted it before, for other masters, in other years you are not yet alive to witness. It is under this new order that you are given, for the first time, full charge of hog-killing day, the single largest and most physically demanding stretch of work the kitchen calendar holds, timed each year to the first hard frost of November, when the cold is reliable enough to keep meat from spoiling during the long hours of butchering ahead. The hogs come up from the palace's own pens before first light, 4 of them this year, and the killing itself is quick and practiced. A blow and then a knife across the throat. The animal's weight collapsing all at once into the men holding it down. Blood pooling dark and steaming in the cold morning air onto ground already churned to mud by the struggle. You catch what you can of this blood too, same as with the turtle, because nothing in this work is wasted. A butchered hog that leaves anything behind is a hog badly used, Rachel says, and you have learned by now never to question the logic, even when the task in front of you turns your stomach. The carcasses hang from a crossbeam behind the kitchen for the whole of that freezing day, and your hands, by mid-morning, have gone past cold into something closer to numb, fumbling slightly on the handle of your knife as you work through the endless list of tasks, scraping bristle from scalded skin, drawing organs out into waiting basins, separating the leaf lard, pale and soft as wax, from the coarser fat destined for soap rather than the table. The smell is enormous and inescapable. Blood and wet hide and wood smoke all mixed together into something that clings to your clothes for days no matter how much you scrub, and your shoulders, by the fourth hog, ache with a deep, bone-level exhaustion that no amount of stretching relieves. The intestines, cleaned and turned inside out and scraped clean in the icy water of the washing trough, a task so unpleasant that even Rachel, after 20 years, still wrinkles her nose doing it, become the casings for the blood sausage, or hog's pudding as the household calls it. And this is perhaps the single most disgusting dish you make all year, though also, strangely, one of the most prized among the household's own meals rather than the master's table, because it uses everything a wealthier kitchen would throw away and turns it, through patient work, into something warm and dense and satisfying against a winter's cold. You stand at the trestle table with a wide bowl of the hog's own blood in front of you, still faintly warm from the animal, thickened with oatmeal and chopped fat and a fistful of herbs, and you work it with your bare hands, feeling the strange, thick, slightly gritty texture of it between your fingers, working it into the cleaned casing through a hollowed cow's horn used as a funnel, tying off each length with twine into fat, glistening links that will be boiled, then finished over the fire until the skin crisps and the inside sets into something you could almost, if you did not know better, mistake for any other sausage on any other table. Best thing we make all year, and not one gentleman upstairs will ever taste a bite of it, Rachel says, watching you work. And there is something almost fond in the way she says it, a small private pride in a dish that belongs entirely to the kitchen, and nobody else, made from parts no fine table would ever knowingly permit near it, and eaten, that first cold night after killing day, by every single person who spent the day earning it, gathered around the banked fire with their hands finally, blessedly warm again. Winter brings one further task that has nothing to do with cooking directly, and everything to do with making everything else in that kitchen possible, and Rachel sends you out for it every January without fail. Once the Palace Canal has frozen thick enough to bear a man's full weight without complaint. Ice cutting is not kitchen work in the way turtle soup or calf's head jelly is kitchen work, but it is, in its own way, the foundation beneath all of it, because without a well-stocked ice house there is no cold larder through the long, hot Virginia summer, no chilled syllabub, no jelly holding its trembling shape long enough to reach a dinner table, only spoiled meat and warm wine and a kitchen's reputation ruined by June. The men go out onto the frozen canal before first light, when the cold is sharpest and the ice, Rachel insists, is safest, because the coldest hours are when it holds its full strength, rather than beginning its slow daily softening under whatever weak winter sun the day might bring. You go with them this year for the first time, old enough now at 15 to be trusted with the work, and the cold hits you the moment you step out from the kitchen's warmth. A cold so complete it feels less like weather, and more like a physical wall you have to push your whole body through with every step across the crusted white lawn toward the canal. The ice itself, when you finally stand on it, feels wrong beneath your feet in a way that takes real effort to trust. Solid, certainly. Solid enough to hold 4 grown men and their saws and their long iron ice hooks. But you can feel, faintly, through the soles of your boots, a low creaking groan every time the whole sheet of it shifts and settles, a sound that raises the hair on the back of your neck, no matter how many times the older men assure you it is perfectly normal, perfectly safe, nothing at all to worry over. The saws bite into the ice with a rasping, grinding sound unlike anything else you hear in a whole year of kitchen work. A long 2-man cross-cut blade dragged back and forth through ice 8 inches thick, throwing up a fine white spray of shavings with every stroke, and your arms, already strong from years of whisking and stirring, still burn within the first quarter hour with a different, deeper kind of exertion than anything the kitchen itself demands of you. The blocks, once cut free, come up out of the black water below in great slabs the size of a small table, dripping, impossibly heavy, and it takes 2 of you working the iron tongs together to haul each one clear of the open channel and sleed it across the ice toward the waiting sledge. One block hauled up wrong slips its grip halfway out of the water and very nearly takes your own foot down into the black gap behind it. You feel the sudden lurch of it, the cold spray across your shins, your own heart slamming hard enough that you can feel it in your throat before the older man beside you gets his own hook into the block and hauls it the rest of the way clear, cursing under his breath. And for a moment the 2 of you simply stand there breathing hard, staring at the black water still rocking gently in the open channel where your foot very nearly went. Careful with your feet near the edge, he tells you, unnecessary now but said anyway, and you nod, your legs still faintly unsteady beneath you, and go back to work. Because the ice house will not fill itself, and the summer, however distant it feels on a morning like this one, is coming regardless of whether you're ready for it. By the time the sledge is loaded and hauled to the ice house, a deep brick-lined pit dug half into the earth behind the kitchen garden, its walls packed thick with straw for insulation, your hands have gone past cold into a dull, aching numbness that takes the better part of an hour by the kitchen fire to properly recover from, your fingers curling stiff and slow, prickling painfully as the feeling returns in uneven, unwelcome waves. The blocks go down into the pit in careful layers, packed tight with more straw between each course, and by the time the last one is settled and the whole pit covered over against the coming spring thaw, you understand, with your whole exhausted body, exactly what Rachel meant all those months ago about everything in that kitchen being either a part of an animal nobody wants to think about, or an hour of somebody's aching arm made to look effortless. The syllabub that will chill in that ice come July owes its existence in no small part to a morning like this one, to cold hands and a cracking sheet of ice, and a lurch of fear on a frozen canal that no gentleman sipping his wine that summer evening will ever once have cause to imagine. A new boy arrives in the kitchen the following spring, small and frightened and reeking of the wagon journey that brought him in from a quarter farm not unlike the one you yourself came from, 7 years ago now, though it feels at once both longer and shorter than that when you try to measure it honestly. His name is Sam. He's 9 years old, and on his first morning he's handed a calf's head across the trestle table by Rachel's own hand, the same way you were handed one, and he's sick behind the woodpile before he's finished singeing the hair from its hide, exactly the way you were, and something in you recognizes the whole shape of the moment so completely that you have to look away for a second before you trust your own face not to show too much of what you are feeling. You are the one who teaches him in the weeks that follow, because Rachel has enough on her hands without also nursing a terrified 9-year-old through his first month of turtle blood and singed hide, and because, though nobody says this plainly, it is simply understood by everyone in the kitchen, you have become, at 15, the person whose job it now is to turn frightened new arrivals into people who can hold a knife steady near a live animal without flinching. You'll be sick again tomorrow probably, you tell Sam on his second evening, watching him pick at a bowl of pottage with none of his usual 9-year-old appetite. Everybody is the first while. Doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. Means you've still got some sense left is all. He looks at you like this is the first kind thing anyone has said to him since the wagon dropped him at the kitchen door, and you remember, with a clarity that surprises you, Rachel's own rough hand over yours guiding the knife into that first turtle's throat, and you understand, watching Sam's face, exactly what she was doing for you in that moment, and why. You did not fully appreciate it at the time. You appreciate it now. It gets easier, you tell him, which is what everyone tells everyone in this line of work, and which is, you have come to believe, both entirely true and not quite the whole truth. Because what actually happens is not that the work stops being disgusting or exhausting or occasionally dangerous. What happens is that you get stronger than the parts of it that once frightened you, the way a hand toughens against a hot handle it has gripped 100 times before. The disgust does not vanish. You simply grow larger than it. Over the following months you teach him the singeing, the way to work a knife around a socket without tearing anything you need to keep whole, the particular trick of a syllabub's timing, the difference between a sauce that has thickened properly and one about to catch and burn. He's clumsy at first, dropping things, cutting his own thumb badly enough on his third week that Rachel has to bind it and send him to sit by the fire for the rest of the day, chastened and pale, and you remember your own early cuts, your own early failures, with a fondness you did not expect grief and exhaustion to eventually make room for. You're better at this than I was at your age, you tell him honestly, one evening in late summer, watching him bone a pigeon with hands that have finally stopped shaking through the whole process. It is true. He learns faster than you did, and there is something satisfying in that, something that feels almost like the small warm coal Rachel's praise once lit in your own chest, watching someone else grow steadier and stronger under your own patient hand the way you once grew steadier under hers. Rachel says I'll be trusted with the good cuts by winter, Sam says, a little proud, a little disbelieving of his own progress. She's usually right about that sort of thing, you say, and think, not for the first time, about how strange and long the road from that first sick, terrified morning to this steadier one truly is, and how you are only now, watching someone else walk it, beginning to understand its full shape. There is one lesson Rachel saves for your second autumn under the new governor, a lesson she says most young cooks never fully accept, even after years in a fine kitchen, because it runs so completely against everything your own body tells you about food that is safe to eat. It concerns the venison that arrives, that October, from a hunting party of gentlemen who spent 3 days in the western woods, and came back with 2 fine bucks slung across pack horses, and it concerns what Rachel does with that venison once it reaches her kitchen, which is, in a word, nothing, for the better part of a week. The carcasses hang in the cold larder, untouched, and every day that passes the smell coming off them grows stronger, sharper, edging closer and closer to something your body recognizes on some level below reasoning as spoiled. By the fourth day you can smell it from clear across the kitchen whenever the larder door opens. A heavy, gamey, faintly sweet, rotten odour that makes your stomach turn the same way the singed hair of a calf's head once did, and you finally ask Rachel, unable to hold the question in any longer, whether the meat has gone bad. Not bad, she says, ripe. There's a difference, and half the fashionable tables in England would send this back if it didn't smell exactly the way it smells right now. She explains it to you while she works, the way she explains most things, without slowing down, expecting you to keep pace with both the task and the lesson at once. Venison, left to hang in cool air for a week or longer, breaks down in ways that tenderize the meat and deepen its flavour into something gentlemen with refined palates call haut goût, a French phrase meaning, roughly, a high taste, and the higher, the closer to true spoilage, without quite crossing over into it, the more prized the dish becomes among those wealthy enough to have developed a taste for it. You do not fully believe her until the night it finally goes onto the fire, and the smell that fills the kitchen as it roasts is, if anything, stronger and stranger than the raw smell in the larder had been, sharp enough that Toby, still young enough to trust his own nose without question, gags openly and has to step outside for a moment. But the meat that comes off the spit, dark and tender and rich, tastes nothing like its smell threatened, and the dish returns from the gentleman's table that night nearly as empty as the turtle soup once did, and you understand, chewing a small scrap of it yourself later by the banked fire, that Rachel was entirely right, and that your own body's alarm at the smell of it was, in this one particular instance, telling you something your palate simply refused to agree with. The same week brings a delivery of live eels from a fisherman on the York River, kept squirming in a covered bucket of water until the moment they are needed, and killing them is its own particular unpleasantness. An eel does not die easily, twisting and coiling even after the head comes off, muscles firing on their own for a startlingly long stretch of time, slick and impossible to hold steady in your bare hands no matter how tightly you grip. Skinned, they go into a raised pie thick with butter and spices, and served cold the next day, sliced into a dish nobody upstairs would ever guess, from its neat golden crust, had spent its previous evening thrashing headless across your trestle table. Half of what a fine table calls delicate, Rachel tells you that night, scrubbing eel slime from beneath her fingernails at the washing trough, is really just something ordinary made harder to recognize. The other half is something a person like you or me would never dream of eating, dressed up until a gentleman convinces himself it's a treat. Learn to tell which is which, and you'll understand every fashionable dinner you ever cook for the rest of your days. You have learned it. It is by now one of the truest things anyone has ever taught you. The winter of your third year in that kitchen brings a fever that moves through the household like the tide, taking first the stable hands, then two of the housemaids. Then, on a bitter morning in January, you yourself, waking in the loft with your whole body aching in a way sleep has not touched, your throat raw, your skin alternating between a clammy chill and a heat that makes the blanket feel unbearable against your bare arms. You do not tell anyone at first. This is not bravery so much as plain calculation, learned young and never fully unlearned. A sick hand in this kitchen is a hand that costs the household nothing in wages, because you draw none, but costs it something in output, in dishes made, in fires tended, and you have seen in other households what happens to enslaved people who are perceived as more troublesick than they are worth well. You're not afraid precisely that Rachel or Mr. Sharp will treat you badly for being ill. You are simply afraid, in the deep unthinking way fear settles into a body that has learned caution as a survival skill, and so you get up and you dress with hands that will not quite stop trembling, and you go down to the kitchen and you build the fire same as every morning, moving through the familiar motions on legs that feel, by the third trip to the wood pile, like they belong to someone else entirely. Rachel catches it within the hour. She always does. Nothing in that kitchen escapes her attention for long, least of all the particular grey, sweat-sheened look of a child working through a fever he is trying to hide. She puts the back of her hand against your forehead in passing, the same brisk, unceremonious gesture she uses to test whether a pan has come to heat, and her face changes the instant she feels what is there. "You're burning," she says, and there is no question in it, only fact, and within minutes she has you sitting by the fire with a blanket around your shoulders and a cup of the same sassafras tea you once brewed for a dying governor pressed into your shaking hands. And though the work of the day does not stop for you, it never stops for anyone. That is simply the nature of the place. Rachel arranges the tasks around you, rather than through you, for the better part of 2 days, giving you the sitting work, the stirring and the shelling, and the small careful jobs that can be done from a bench by the fire, rather than standing at the trestle table for hours on legs that will not properly hold your weight. Your hands through those 2 feverish days feel clumsy and thick, fumbling with tasks that would normally take you no thought at all, and your skin, already cracked and roughened from years of hot water and cold winters, feels stretched too tight over your knuckles, aching with every small motion. You sweat through your shirt sitting perfectly still. You shiver minutes later, wrapped in a blanket beside a roaring fire. Time moves strangely, the hours blurring together into a haze punctuated only by the small steady rhythm of whatever task is currently in your lap, and you understand, somewhere in the fog of it, that this fever is teaching you something about your own body's limits, that the work itself, for all its exhaustion, has never quite managed to teach you before. By the 3rd morning the fever breaks, leaving you weak and hollowed out but clear-headed again, and Rachel setting a bowl of plain cornmeal mush in front of you at breakfast. Nothing rich, nothing that might upset a stomach still finding its feet, says only, "Back on your legs today, slow." And you are grateful, in a way you do not fully have words for, that in this particular kitchen, under this particular woman's care, being sick did not also mean being punished for it. You have heard enough over the years from people who came from other households to know how rare that particular kindness truly is, and how little you can count on it lasting beyond the walls of this one kitchen, under this one roof, for as long as your circumstances happen to keep you here. By your 4th spring in that kitchen you are 16, and there comes a dinner unlike any Rachel has trusted to your hands before. A full formal service, 6 removes, 30 covers, prepared for a delegation of Burgesses and their guests during a particularly long and contentious session of the House. And Rachel, 2 days before it, tells you plainly that she intends to oversee only the turtle, leaving every other dish in the meal to your own hand and your own judgment. You do not sleep well the night before. You lie awake in the loft, no longer sharing it with Toby, who left the kitchen 2 winters past to work the stables instead, listening to Sam's steady breathing beside you, and running through the whole sequence of the coming day in your mind. The calves' heads, the jellies, the syllabub timed to the very last minute, the dozen small decisions about sherry and mason butter that Rachel has spent 4 years teaching you to make correctly without needing to ask her first. The day itself passes in the particular blur of total concentration, every motion drawn from 4 years of repetition until your hands move faster than conscious thought, and it is only well after the last dish has gone up the covered walkway that you allow yourself to notice how badly your shoulders ache, how raw your knuckles have gone from the hot water and the endless work, how your legs, standing at the trestle table since before dawn, have begun to tremble faintly with the specific fatigue of a body that has given everything it has to a single long task. Prince comes back down near midnight with the last of the empty dishes and finds you sitting on the bench by the fire, too tired even to properly celebrate what you already half suspect. From the pattern of what has come back scraped clean was a genuine success. They asked who made the jellies, Prince says, setting down the tray. Or one of the gentlemen from the western counties said he'd never tasted anything so fine in his life, not even in Williamsburg's finest tavern. He pauses, and something almost like a smile crosses his usually composed face. I told him the household's cook was responsible. I didn't specify which one. You understand, even exhausted as you are, exactly what that omission means and exactly what it does not mean. That no gentleman upstairs tonight will ever know your name, will ever think to wonder whether the boy who made the jelly they praised is 13 or 16 or 60, enslaved or free, and that this invisibility is, and will likely remain for the whole of your life, simply the price of the work regardless of how well you do it. But Rachel, standing by the fire with her arms crossed, gives you the same short, satisfied nod she gave you once years ago, over a dish of stewed pigeons, and this time you understand it fully for what it is. Not the world's recognition, which you may never receive, but the recognition of the one person in this kitchen whose judgment you have come, over 4 hard years, to trust above almost anyone else's, including, on your more exhausted nights, your own. You're near ready to run a kitchen like this one yourself, Rachel tells you later, once the others have gone up to sleep and it is only the 2 of you left by the banked coals, the way it so often is at the end of these long nights. Not tomorrow. Not next year, maybe. But it's coming, and when it does, I want you to remember something I wish somebody had told me plainer, back when I was your age and just as tired as you are tonight. You wait, watching the coals shift and settle, the same way you have watched them shift and settle 100 nights before this one. Being good at this work will never once change what you are to the people who eat what you make, she says, but it will change what you are to yourself. Hold on to that part. It's the only part of this they can't take from you, whatever else happens. You do not fully understand it that night, sitting there with your shoulders aching and your hands raw and a jelly success still faintly warm in your chest like a coal of its own. But you will. You are slowly, across all these long hard years, coming to. On quiet evenings after that, when the day's dinner is finished and the washing done and Sam has already gone up to sleep, you find yourself sitting by the banked fire the way Rachel taught you to sit by it, not quite resting, never quite fully at ease, but still watching the coals the way a person watches something they have come to trust without ever fully understanding. You think, on these evenings, about the people this kitchen and this town have put in front of you across 4 years that feel, some nights, like they have lasted a lifetime, and other nights like they passed in the space of a single long day. Rachel, who has run this kitchen for 2 decades now, under 3 different masters, and will likely run it for years yet to come, whose scarred hands taught yours everything they know, and whose small nod of approval you have come, without quite meaning to want more than almost anything else this life has offered you. Prince, immaculate even in a kitchen thick with rendered fat, who came apart for one terrible morning in October and put himself back together within the hour because the household needed him whole, and who still, 4 years later, has never once raised his voice at you, not even on the worst of your early, clumsy mornings. Isham, up in his bell tower with the wind pulling at both your coats, who told you that thinking about what lies underneath a fine view doesn't change the view any, but that he thinks about it every day regardless, a small stubborn honesty you have carried with you since. The woman sold south, away from her children, whose name you still remember though you knew her only slightly, and whose fate hangs. Still, at the edge of every good day this household gives you, a reminder that gentleness in a place like this one is always conditional, always borrowed, never fully yours to keep. Sam, asleep upstairs right now, who was sick behind the woodpile on his first morning the exact way you were sick on yours, and who looks at you now the way you once looked at Rachel, and who will, some day, if this household holds together long enough, be sitting on this same bench teaching some frightened new arrival the same lessons you're only now finishing learning yourself, and Lord Boat taught, whom you barely knew, whom you spoke to never, but whose sudden death taught you more about the shape of your own life, its fragility, its total dependence on the temperament of men you will never truly know, than 4 years of ordinary kitchen work ever managed to teach you on its own. You think, too, about the dishes themselves, these strange transformed things this kitchen has taught your hands to make. Turtles turned to soup rich enough to make gentlemen loosen their waistcoats. Calves' heads turned to a dozen dishes so far removed from their origin that no one upstairs ever thinks to ask. Hooves turned to jelly clear as glass. Blood turned to sausage. Nobody upstairs will ever taste, but that warms this whole kitchen through the coldest nights of winter. Venison hung until it edges toward true spoilage and comes out, somehow, more prized for having done so. Rachel was right. That first night you understood it. Everything in this room is either a part of an animal nobody upstairs wants to think about, or an hour of somebody's aching arm made to look effortless. And you have spent 4 years learning to be the hand behind both kinds of transformation, invisible, essential, entirely unthanked by the people whose tables you fill. That should feel, you sometimes think, like something closer to bitterness than it actually does. It does not fully escape you what this life costs, what it takes and gives no accounting for, what it might yet still take from you the moment a new governor's temper or a distant creditor's debt decides your fate has changed. But sitting here tonight, your hands finally still after a day of good honest work well done, Sam sleeping soundly upstairs because of lessons you taught him with the same patience Rachel once spent on you, there is a kind of quiet in your chest that 4 years ago you would not have believed possible in a place like this one. Not peace, exactly. Something smaller and more durable than peace. Something closer to competence and to the strange, hard-won dignity of a person who has learned, against every circumstance built to deny it to him, to be genuinely, unmistakably good at something. The politics of the town reach even this kitchen, though you understand them only in fragments, filtered down through what gets said above stairs and repeated, half understood, below. In your second year, word comes that the Burgesses meeting just up the street at the Capitol have agreed among themselves not to purchase certain goods brought in from England. A protest, Prince explains one evening, against duties Parliament has laid on tea and paper and glass and paint. Duties the gentlemen of Virginia consider an insult to rights they believe belong to them as Englishmen, regardless of which side of an ocean they happen to live on. You do not fully grasp the argument, not at first, but you grasp its consequences quickly enough, because consequences are the language this kitchen actually speaks. The fine Bohea tea that once arrived by the chest from London grows scarce, and then, for a stretch of months, vanishes from the palace stores almost entirely. And Rachel has you steeping sassafras root and dried mint and once a bitter concoction of roasted ground chicory root that she swears, with a perfectly straight face, tastes near enough to coffee that a gentleman with his eyes closed might never notice the substitution. You're fairly certain this is not entirely true. You brew it anyway, and it is served, and no one upstairs complains loudly enough for the word to travel back down to you, which in this household counts as a genuine success. Half these gentlemen arguing loudest against London's taxes, Rachel says one evening, straining the chicory through a cloth with the same care she gives a proper coffee bean, still expect their sugar and their good Madeira same as ever. Politics is a fine thing to argue over supper. Doesn't stop a single one of them from wanting supper. You think about this more than you let on. You've heard by now enough fragments of argument carried down from the octagonal supper room. Talk of liberty, of rights, of a crown reaching too far into pockets it has no business reaching into, to understand in your own quiet way the strange bitter shape of it, that the very men arguing most passionately for their own freedom from a distant authority's control sit at a table built and served entirely by people who possess no freedom at all, and that not one of them, so far as you've ever heard, seems troubled by the shape of that contradiction while they eat. You do not say this thought aloud to anyone, not even Rachel, though you suspect from the particular flatness in her voice whenever the subject comes up, that she has arrived at something very close to the same understanding a long time before you did. There is, that same season, one dinner grand enough that Rachel entrusts you with the centerpiece of the final course, a subtlety, the household calls it, a spectacle dish built to impress the eye as much as feed the mouth, and for this occasion it is a floating island, a great glass bowl of pale, softly trembling custard, with mounds of whipped, sugared egg white poached gently in milk and set adrift on its surface like small white clouds on a still yellow sea. The whole thing dusted at the last possible moment with a scatter of crushed sugar and candied lemon peel that must go on just before the dish leaves the kitchen, or the moisture beneath will dissolve every last sparkle of it into nothing. Turning the custard itself out clean is its own small art, one Rachel has been teaching you for weeks in smaller, quieter batches, meant only for the kitchen's own table. You wrap a cloth wrung out in hot water around the outside of the mould, hold it there a slow count of 10, feeling the custard loosen its grip against the tin through the warmth soaking through your fingers, and then invert the whole thing in one clean, decisive motion onto the waiting dish, holding your breath until the mould lifts free and the custard holds its shape, whole and gleaming rather than collapsing into a ruined heap the way your very first 3 attempts did, back in the winter, dishes you were made to eat yourself rather than waste. Spoonful after humbling spoonful of good custard that had simply failed to hold its own shape. Tonight it holds. The islands drift, pale and perfect across the trembling yellow surface, and Prince, taking the dish from your hands at the kitchen door, gives you the smallest nod of acknowledgement, before carrying it away up the covered walkway toward a room you will never enter, to be set in front of men who will spoon it into their mouths and speak, perhaps, of liberty and rights, and the insults of a distant parliament, never once glancing down long enough to wonder whose steady, careful hands spent the better part of an hour making sure the sugar sparkled and the islands held their shape. Tonight, the fire has burned down to its last low bed of coals, and you bank it the way you have banked it 1,000 nights before, covering the embers with ash so they will hold their heat until the fire needs waking again before dawn, and you climb the narrow stair to the loft where Sam is already breathing slow and even in his sleep, and you lie down on the same straw mattress you have slept on for 4 years now, feeling the particular ache in your shoulders and your lower back that comes from a full day's honest labour, the kind of ache that no longer frightens you the way it once did, because you have learned, across all these years, that it will ease by morning the same way it always has. Your hands, resting on top of the blanket, still smell faintly of the day's work, no matter how hard you scrub them at the trough before climbing the stairs. A little of wood smoke, a little of butter, a little of something you cannot fully name that is simply the accumulated smell of 4 years spent this close to fire and flesh, and the endless patient transformation of one thing into another. You turn your hands over slowly in the dark, feeling the map of small scars and calluses they have gathered, not so different, you realize, with something between pride and sorrow, from the map written across Rachel's own hands the first week you ever worked beside her. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough tonight, in this particular kitchen, under this particular roof, though you have learned by now never to mistake tonight's safety for any promise about the night still to come. That is simply the arrangement of a life like yours, and you have stopped, mostly, letting the uncertainty of it steal the rest that your body has honestly earned. The sounds of Williamsburg drift up faintly through the loft's small window, a dog barking somewhere down toward the capital end of the street, the distant creak of a cart still making its way home late, the low murmur of the town settling itself into sleep the way it settles every single night. Whether or not the household above the kitchen has buried a governor that year or welcomed a new one, whether or not a fever has moved through the servants' quarters, whether or not a boy named Sam cried behind the woodpile on his first frightened morning, the town does not pause for any of it. It simply continues the way this kitchen continues, the way you yourself have learned, across 4 hard years, to continue. You think, drifting now towards sleep, about how strange it is to have arrived here, not merely to Williamsburg, though that journey itself once felt impossibly long, but to this exact state of your own mind, this quiet, steady competence that 4 years ago would have seemed as distant and unreachable as the view from Isham's bell tower seemed on your very first climb up its narrow stair. You are not free, you may never be free, but you are, within the narrow room this life has allotted you, becoming someone whose hands know exactly what they're doing, and there is a kind of quiet dignity in that knowledge, that nobody upstairs, eating your soup and your jellies and your calves' brains without ever once learning your name, can take away from you, however much else they hold the power to take. Centuries will pass. The palace. You have spent 4 years of your life inside will change hands and change purposes more times than you could ever guess tonight. Lying here in the dark with your aching shoulders and your scarred hands folded on your chest. The kitchen itself will one day stand as something closer to a memory than a working room. Its fire finally, permanently cold, its trestle table cleared of every trace of turtle blood and singed hide. The very street outside, the finest in all the colonies by every account you have ever heard, will be walked by generations of people who never once think about the hands that made the food. Behind the grand dinners, their own history books remember the invisible labour that let the visible history happen at all. But the ache in tired shoulders at the end of an honest day's work, that will not change. The particular relief of finally lying down after standing since before dawn, that will not change either. The small, private pride of a hand that has learned to do something difficult well, regardless of who does or does not notice. Some things simply do not change. However many centuries roll past the window of whatever room a person happens to be resting in whatever year the calendar has reached. So let it come then. This rest you have earned the same hard way you earn everything in this life, with your own two hands, your own two aching shoulders, your own quiet, stubborn endurance. Let the sounds of the town fade the rest of the way into silence. Let the ache in your back soften, finally, into something closer to nothing at all. Let your thoughts slow and scatter and settle the way Rachel's coals settle every single night into a bed of banked ash that will still be holding its warmth, waiting patiently when the fire needs waking again before the sun comes up. You have survived another year of this strange, exacting, exhausting life. You have learned another dozen dishes, taught another frightened boy how to hold a knife steady, watched a governor die and a household hold together anyway, climbed a bell tower and seen your whole small world laid out below you like something you could hold in two palms. That is not nothing. Some nights lying here in the dark with your body finally, blessedly still, it feels like it might even be enough. Tomorrow the fire will need waking before dawn. Tomorrow there will be dishes to scrub and fires to feed, and whatever the day's demands turn out to be, the same as every day before it, and every day still to come. But that is tomorrow's work, waiting patiently in tomorrow's kitchen. Tonight there is only this: the straw mattress beneath you, the steady breath of a sleeping boy beside you, who is only just beginning to learn everything you already know. The last of the town's sounds fading into the dark outside your small window. And sleep finally, patient and complete, reaching up to claim you the way it has claimed every tired hand that has ever worked in that kitchen before you, and will claim every tired hand that works there still, long after your own name has been forgotten by everyone who ever ate what those hands made. Good night.